We're going to be talking about retrofit. So my name is Melissa Mean. I'm the founding director of something called WeCan Make, which is a community land trust in Bristol. And before, I do promise, like those of you who are really here for the super geekery of retrofit, we will get to that, I promise. But I thought it might be quite interesting just to share a little bit of our journey to retrofit and what we're kind of like bringing to that kind of space. Because I think people enter kind of like the retrofit world in quite a few different ways, and I think it's quite interesting to kind of explore that. And then this session is designed as a little bit of a overview session of all the stuff that we've kind of been doing on retrofit. And then tomorrow, there's a bonus session where we can deep dive into whatever you find most interesting and get a little bit more kind of like into the weeds of it. And then there's some other members of the team kind of like who are particularly specialized in those things as well. And we can really get like a bit more kind of hands-on with how things work as well. And you might have seen outside, just outside the door as well, we've got a 3D model of a house that's got some, it's basically a model of the kind of retrofit that we've co-designed in the community, and that's what we're kind of proposing as well. So definitely go and check out that model and have a squeeze of all the natural materials and things like that we're using, because it's quite nice and quite fun, brings it a bit to life as well. But yeah, I'll just tell you a little bit about our neighbourhood in Bristol, Knowle West. Anyone been there? Woo! Yeah. Well, everyone is very, very welcome to come to Knowle West. Come and find us. We're basically a 100-year-old council-built estate in the south of the city. And I guess like 100 years ago, we were very much seen as the future of housing. So these are all homes that were built fit for heroes. And the builders who built the estate originally, they had a nice nickname for the estate, which was called the 5,000 Island Forest, because it's 5,000 homes sitting on a hill, surrounded by greenery, which is quite a beautiful kind of way to describe our estate, which maybe not many people do describe it in those kind of terms quite often, and it's kind of maybe people more focus on some things like the levels of multiple deprivation and the way that the public realm and the services and other things have been neglected on those 100 years. And you generally get a bit of a kind of like a tendency that people want to kind of demolish our estate and start again, rather than kind of like work with what's there. So, for example, this is kind of quite a raw, recent example of that, which this is the cinema that used to be like on the heart of our high street, which was very cool, and it now looks like that, which is kind of just kind of vanished kind of overnight. And there's like a really big community campaign to try and save it, because that was a precious piece of kind of civic and community space that had a real mark of something in our community. So we tried to save the building for many years, and then we tried to save the bricks. And you can't imagine the blood, sweat, and tears. We knew that there'd be like 100,000 beautiful bricks that would have popped out of that building. And we literally had to kind of cry in front of officials to try and save any of those bricks. All we managed to save out of all of those 100,000 bricks that popped out so beautifully out of that building, all we managed to save was about 10 cubic square meters, which is about 4,000 bricks, which is it's just such a waste of all of that embodied energy, but all of that heritage and all of those, all the things that are embodied in that building just kind of trashed like that so easily. So it's one of those kind of like moments when you go like, it has to be different. We can't keep on doing this. And how do we find a different way to do development, treasure the things that are possible, and begin to kind of not just think of a whole urban realm as something that can just be demolished, trashed, started again, but how do we work with these materials to reimagine them, to adapt them and change them over time? So we've taken an approach with kind of WeCan Make, and how can we think about things differently and start to grow some of the tools and resources and kind of mindsets that can begin to think differently about how we do development and what kind of neighbourhoods and streets and homes we want. And I think, at the heart of that is the imagination of our neighbours and our community, and creating space for that, and doing that in all sorts of ways, and making it really easy for people to step in and imagine that something else might be possible. So we've done kind of all sorts of things from, we did a podcast series. Hey, anyone else done a podcast series here? Yeah. Well, I highly recommend it. Just to reimagine, like, what ideas do we want to see from around the world that could work in our neighbourhood. We've done kind of, developed a community design code to try and set the rules about what kind of development and things that we'd want to have welcomed in our space as well. So having that chance to dream a little different and see what's possible. It's also kind of like working like, our estate is like 100 years of DIY kind of hacking spirit of kind of like working with the homes we've got and seeing what kind of hacks and little kind of adaptations we can do over time. And there's like deep know-how and creativity in that. So how can you tap into that and kind of use that? And then also thinking about not just kind of like importing kind of high carbon materials, but what are the kind of more local, what's the materials from our bioregion? What are the materials from our neighbourhood, thinking of it as an urban mine that we could reuse? So we spend a lot of time kind of thinking about, okay, what are the trees that grow within 100 miles of Knowle West? What could we use for? And take really careful specification, what you can then use them, not just as and then you're locking up carbon really long term in construction, rather than kind of wasting it through short term uses, through burning it or squandering it or just trashing it to landfill. And then thinking about, so this is an example as well. The window there that we've kind of made is made from dieback ash, which has been a big issue in southwest of England. It's all the kind of ash trees that are kind of have got a disease and need to be cut down and kind of burnt. So here what we've done is thermally modify that timber and then be able to make it into a new window, again, making a really good long-term product there. And then this is a forest, sustainable forest near us. And kind of thinning out the forest helps the whole forest grow more kind of stronger back. And then these are the trees that, some of the trees that we've cut for some homes that we're kind of making. And then you can get the regrowth of the forest coming from that. So beginning to think about things in different ways. And then really thinking about how do we get the tools and resources into communities' own hands so they can adapt and change the neighbourhood and their streets and homes on their own terms. So we've got a little neighbourhood factory, which we share with Knowle West Media Centre, our sister organisation. And here, this is really fabulous because we can get digital kits actually in people's hands. So this is kind of CNC machines and laser cutters and other things where you can actually begin to design and make things and in front of your eyes, prototype and test things out. And you get these kind of capabilities and these kinds of tools, you can begin to make some kind of new possibilities and different types of intervention in your neighbourhood. So, for example, when our estate was first built, it was like a lot of really big front gardens. And over the last 100 years, different things have happened to them. So some have been kept really kind of green and kind of like gardens as they were originally intended to. Some have rewilded themselves, as you can see in that middle one, which I find quite exciting, actually. I think it might be the biggest privet hedge I've ever seen in my life, which is pretty cool. But then about a third of those front gardens have been lost to private car parks in this way. So thinking about, okay, so how can we use a bit of imagination, some of those tools and materials that we're keen to explore, how can you begin to intervene this and begin to reimagine that space again as a part of a connected part of the social and environmental infrastructure of the neighbourhood. So what we developed was a front garden retrofit kit, which is a little kit here. It's got a little bench, a little library, a planter that you can also use as a roadblock, a rocking chair. And this is a way to kind of like, you can very simply kind of like take an alternative time of ownership and sharing of your front garden. And I think it's a really interesting space between private space and kind of public space of the wider neighbourhood to begin to get a different kind of interaction there and a different kind of connection with neighbours as well. And this is growing into a really nice collaboration with Civic Square. You can see down in the corner there. And this is now kind of spread. I think we're up to over 100 gardens across the UK that have got some of these things in it. And what I think is lovely about this is like, there's nothing like extraordinary or entirely original about any of these items, like a bench or a little library. But I think putting them in a collection that anyone can download the recipe for it and make wherever they are, it begins to act as a different kind of shared infrastructure level, and you feel like your little garden, wherever you are, you're part of this bigger network of being able to do things. And I think it begins to be quite exciting. And then thinking up, it's also like a really easy first step in trying to do something. And I think what we found with this is a really good prop to then begin to talk about other things, whether that's like Dilwara down in the middle, down there. She's taken on literacy. She's like books to the kids, books to the neighbourhoods. It's amazing. She's really using it for that. In other ways, we use it as a kind of first prop to begin to talk about retrofit and other things, or ecological kind of improving kind of greenery in the garden and things. So it's a really good prop, a good safe first step to begin to think about things in different ways. So that's kind of like one kind of intervention, and then thinking about how to adapt more sensitively, kind of trying to think about development in a neighbourhood like urban acupuncture, being really precise where you insert new houses. So you're maintaining and enhancing the natural form and getting kind of much more value out of the existing built environment rather than just going for slash and burn or greenfield sprawl. So this is a little house here. Tony and her daughter Amantia were living in quite crowded conditions in her parents' council house, but then had a big back garden where we worked and co-designed with the neighbours and Tony and her family to develop a home for her and her daughter to live in. And that's Tony in our little factory making the cassettes for her home there. And then a really nice celebration when she moved in to kind of celebrate her living in that home there. And you begin to think you can, a development is urban infrastructure rather than kind of top-down kind of demolish and densify. So that's the kind of like approach that, or kind of thinking and ethos that WeCanMake has brought to the sort of retrofit agenda. And that kind of, that energy is meeting the energy of the Retrofit Reimagined extravaganza, festival, year-long kind of celebration of things. So this was, 18 months ago? Was it there? 18 months? Yeah, but this was really super foundational because this was a chance to really bring together what we were doing in our neighbourhood with other neighbourhoods, including Civic Square, including kind of Heel in London, Dark Matter Labs, Scotland, a session here. And I don't know what the running total of how many people got involved in terms of neighbours and people, but it was, in the thousands, people coming together to really explore these ideas. And that just seeded just such a sense of kind of shared possibility that you could begin to shape things in a different way, thinking about land, materials, and people, that is a chance to change things. And then kind of coming from that, what's grown is our neighbourhood Retrofit Street Demonstrator. So this is quite a few of our neighbours from our neighbourhood came to the Retrofit Reimagined events, and we going sort of saying, all right, let's do a street demonstrator and see if we can get something off the ground to all the brilliant, wonderful ideas that we explored through Retrofit Reimagined. How can we make those tangible and real in our neighbourhood? And can we create a small experiment, street-based experiment, to begin to demonstrate that and try these things up on the ground? And to kind of help that, it's kind of, it's like how do you galvanise and mobilise the resources to do that? So part of it is like having, a street with enough people in it who are up for trying something and going on that journey. We talked about this morning about having to work with quite a level of uncertainty. You're not quite sure what you're going to demonstrate yet, but you're willing to go on a journey to kind of like try out some ideas. So that's one kind of thing. And there's also trying to assemble the other resources so you can actually do something for real. And so our street demonstrator project is part of 2 other projects as well, which is like, whoa, that's a lot of logos, there's a lot of organizations. But basically, the one on the left, Transforming Homes, is a lot of academic research money from research councils. And then the Mission Net Zero one is a lot of government innovation money going through Innovate UK. So this is like definitely kind of like 2 sectors trying to rethink things, and then this kind of working with us on the ground to see what it means actually kind of in real life. And I think there is definitely loads of learning about how do you bring these kind of like collaborations together and how can you sustain them, and how do you create enough of a Venn diagram that that these people are happy enough with what's happening on the ground, but still to maintain the integrity of what you actually want to achieve that's meaningful for your street, your neighbourhood. And I think this is like requires continual maintenance to make this kind of actually kind of sustain, which is, it's kind of interesting. And I think in any retrofit project, pretty much, the big pots of money have 1,000 strings on them and conditions. And so you absolutely have to engage with those conditions to do almost anything. We're actually kind of lucky. This is kind of innovation money. This is meant to be more free, more kind of liberal and try things out. But as you maybe might hear later, then not entirely straightforward, I would say. So all of this dark matter stuff you absolutely have to engage with, and that is definitely part of the retrofit story. But what have we actually been doing? So our street, Andover Road, which is such a cool street to be working with, and it's kind of, we went out quite widely kind of seeing who in the neighbourhood might be up for it. But you know, there's like certain places have an energy that kind of draws you kind of to it, which is kind of cool. And Andover Road has got this in loads. And it's kind of, what's really, it was one of the original streets. It was the original demonstration street when the estate was first built out 100 years ago. So the council commissioned different sets of builders to do build-outs of the homes and then worked out who was the best at it, and then they got the commission. So it's the original show home demonstrator street, which is kind of cool. And then there's other kind of slightly useful things in the a climate minister, Kerry McCarthy. That's a constituency MP for this place. So that's quite useful to be able to think about that. And then probably most importantly as well, there's some absolutely brilliant people living on this street who are up for the journey of trying some things out. And it's a really kind of mixed street, really typical of Knowle West. It's like half the homes still in council ownership, half the homes in right to buy, so in private ownership, and a few kind of a private rent, but it's super typical. And then the other cool thing about like thinking about focusing on a street and what's quite useful, and then how it can then scale up to the neighbourhood or beyond. So within Knowle West, there's kind of 5,000 homes. They're all interwar council-built homes, brick-built, gas-powered, not very much insulation, so they're all really similar. They're all within the whole of Knowle West, the 5,000 homes. There's only 20 house types. So, and then because Andover Road was this original kind of demonstrator street, there's actually 8 of those house types on one street, which is really rare. Like most of the rest of Knowle West, there's only 1 or 2. So it's quite cool that we can go in depth on this street and really get the retrofit recipe right for probably the whole neighbourhood, which is very cool. And this kind of type home approach to retrofit is an approach that's been taken in other places as well. So, you know, get the retrofit recipe right for Victorian terraces, or I think the one that we all need to do is like 1990s executive homes. They definitely need a kind of like a recipe makeover as well. So we're waiting for that one. So this is kind of cool. So you can kind of see like out of, you know, this little block here, I think there's 4 of them on Andover Road, but then there's like over 90 of them across the rest of the estate. So you can begin to get that pattern. I mean, one note of caution, no 2 homes are the same, even if they are the same type. So you can't like just totally cookie cutter as you go, but you can get that basic recipe right, which is quite exciting. And then we've taken really the kind of approach to kind of community involvement and participation, really trying to create a crew with Andover Road residents. So we recruited, really working with around kind of 20 families overall, kind of loosely on the road. And then we've got 6 families who are kind of signed up as crew, who we actually pay for their time to be involved in co-design workshops. And this is about respecting kind of time and expertise, and making sure this is a research project that's really exploring stuff, so making sure that time and knowledge is valued. And the kind of rhythm that we go is like have in-depth, really kind of concentrated kind of sessions, co-design sessions with our kind of crew, and then broadening out, sharing that with the wider neighbourhood. And so you're getting that kind of rhythm of like deep and then sharing and sense making, that kind of as you go. It's quite an iterative kind of process. Invested really strongly, not just in the kind of formal kind of workshop kind of process or formal consultation process, but also thinking about this as retrofit of social relations and how do we talk together, know each other, so we can actually talk about these things and discuss things. So I think one of the first things that we did was a bus trip for everyone to go and see the Christmas lights in Weston-super-Mare, which doesn't sound very retrofitty, but it like actually got everyone together and you could do something together. It's the first thing of, you know, doing something together. We've done playing out sessions on the street as well. And I'm sorry, Jazz is going to talk later, but even neighbours like right next door to each other had kids and they didn't know each other before this kind of happened. And now people are beginning to know each other and understand each other. And it's getting the basics right, so being able to talk to each other, even know each other before you start doing complicated things like retrofit feels really important. So yeah, getting the people stuff right, absolutely essential. Very good. We've been working with Bath University, who are brilliant. Kind of like all the kind of technical kind of depth. And so 6 of the homes have been monitored to every inner being of themselves have absolutely been mapped. So all of the kind of possible tests and over a whole year. So that thing of getting really understanding these house types really in depth and what their performance is in all the ways, massively important. And that is a bit of a luxury for a well-funded research project to have that, so wanting to be as generous as possible with that kind of data. I mean, it's even included, you know, extractions from all of the internal wall insulation in all of the homes, and then doing kind of testing. This is they've got a kind of a reality emulator simulator room at Bath University, and they've, you know, tested all sorts of environmental conditions in them, which is great. Test chamber, oh yeah, that's what they call it, which is quite cool. And as a result of that, we have got a really in-depth understanding of what's going on in these homes, and I think begins to get some of I guess the shock, actually, of like the conditions that people are having to make do with and make work, as you realise that they're not just squandering energy and impossible to keep warm and impossible to keep damp and mould out. But you think like one of the kind of shocking things was around the levels of internal CO2 levels, that because of the homes are kind of under space standards and there's a level of kind of overcrowding, like the internal air quality is, you know, is really not good and at a kind of chronic level to human health. So the ventilation is not happening in the homes and there's not enough kind of space there. So, you know, this isn't just a carbon issue about retrofit, it's about the absolute quality of how people are able to live in homes that, you know, really no longer fit for purpose, really. So yeah, all of that kind of learning's been done over a whole year, exploring things from kind of every angle. And we've developed a really beautiful Knowle West recipe of what people want from what retrofit means for them. And it includes like what you would expect when somebody talks about retrofit, in that it includes improving the building fabric to improve insulation. Yep, absolutely important. The thing that we're pushing here is use biomaterials and natural materials rather than oil-based products, which just make the climate emergency worse in the long term, you know, rather than saving it. Also includes renewable energy and shifting over that. So you would expect that totally within a retrofit thing. But I think we've pushed it in more broader, kind of expanded ways. And this is coming from really engaging and understanding how people are living now and how people want to live. So I think the two key moves is also thinking about the kind of green infrastructure and the space outside the homes as well. So the garden space and the street space is as important as what goes on inside the home to make a really kind of quality place to live, really important to people. So things like street trees and planting, that kind of stuff is part of that response to the climate emergency and the kind of housing quality emergency as well. And then the other part of it as well is around spatial retrofit. So improving and expanding the kind of spatial footprint of the homes to support people to live in the way that they want to do. So this is like definitely a bit of a broader recipe than you would get from a kind of a conventional government-defined program about what retrofit is. But I think this is massively important if we're trying to move to a just transition where virtually every home in the UK needs to be retrofitted. Then there needs to be, people need to be able to opt into that and see this not just as a top-down technical fix to fix some energy efficiency insulation. It's actually got to be something that feels compelling and you can see yourself improving your home and your life for your family. So I think this, in terms of a community co-design way to understand this broader kind of idea of retrofit, this definitely does that. Promise you some technical geeky bits. Here it comes, everyone. Whoa. So I think it's really fascinating, kind of like, these are just a couple of things that we found is the homes in Knowle West, they've got a really narrow cavity wall inside. And so I think for the last, I don't know, probably half a century, people have been stuffing all sorts of absolute crap in there to try and kind of insulate them. And it's all failed, basically, because it's too narrow. So everything is soggy, wet, clumpy, failing, and basically turns every home into a mold-making machine. So what needs to happen is to have all of that stuff pulled out and then either put external wall insulation or internal wall insulation in it instead and let those kind of buildings dry out and breathe. At the moment, what's happening is just there's this repeat thing of like, oh, we'll just put a new product inside, and it's just doing that, but it's going to perpetuate and continue. There's another little feature in the eaves. There's a little gap. It's kind of like a design fault of how the homes were kind of built. That there's a the gap that basically, again, turns all of the bedrooms into mould-making machines. So if you're going to triage every house in Knowle West, then this is one of the first things that you do, and that would instantly create better living environments for everyone. A relatively simple change that you could do and operationalise kind of for everyone. So you begin to see how a recipe can build up for retrofit that doesn't require massive deep retrofit of everything, but a real kind of triaged approach that could be transformational in terms of people's quality of life. And then think about how we spatially retrofit the homes. So like pretty modest reconfiguration with a little extension and a little bit of moving around kind of inside. You can basically transform a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home into a 2-bathroom, 4 or even 5-bedroom home, which is an absolute kind of game changer for families who are living in overcrowded conditions. And nobody is building 4 and 5-bedroom council houses new. Like, it's impossible to get that. So if we're going to respond to what people need from their homes, this is a much more carbon efficient way to supply those homes and also support people to live well where they are already without forcing them to, move out or live in really cramped conditions. So we think that's really kind of exciting. And then we've also developed thinking about kind of the green infrastructure and biodiversity, really, so working with an ecologist, really mapping about the soil in the neighbourhood and the garden and what works there, and then what is the recipe in terms of what's the plant species and bugs and butterflies that can really work here, and get that as a kind of intervention kind of plan that people can begin to improve their gardens as well. And then thinking about how do you kind of develop retrofit as a way of building community wealth. It's kind of like the dominant model in kind of retrofit is that an external firm will come and do all the works and then they're gone again. And it's pretty much all the value of doing this stuff washes through the community rather than kind of sticking to it. So what we're kind of focusing on is like, if we've got a great recipe of what our neighbourhood needs in terms of the physical interventions to improve the neighbourhood, then how do we grow the skills within our neighbourhood to do that work ourselves? And then developing kind of the skills and infrastructure to support a community wealth developing model. So we've been running, very much inspired by the brilliant kind of trade schools that Civic Square has been running a program of trade schools since the start of this year, and done set on kind of DIY tools, natural materials, and we're just about to start a kind of design and build section of using those skills and applying those to live builds, which is really exciting. You'll be, the thrill of actually being able to teach people how to use a drill right or a saw. It's just like mind blown. It's just incredible. And then the absolute joy of, getting clay and hemp and things between your fingers and toes is just very nice. I think there's like a real nice model that can kind of grow there. We're really inspired by, it's a Dutch healthcare model, which has been going in the Netherlands since 2006, called Buurtzorg. I don't know if there's any Dutch speakers in the room. Woohoo! Hey, ciao! Very good. I don't know if you know this model at all, but yeah. So this is like an alternative to centralised healthcare. This set up neighbourhood teams of kind of self-managed groups of nurses, up to 12 in each neighbourhood. And started in 2006, and it was scaled. There's like 800 of these across the Netherlands now. And it's basically patient-centered and takes a whole kind of like person approach to health as well, so supporting kind of patient independence. And we think that this could be a model that could work for retrofit as well, that if you can train up in neighbourhoods, crews of local trades that absolutely understand what their type of homes need, that you can get the real kind of know-how and quality assurance at a place-based level. And then that can be, it can be not just doing kind of like random kind of interventions on homes, but really understanding what each family and household needs and kind of supporting that, and supporting that family to understand how their home works and how those sort of kind of retrofit intervention works, so they can actually operate their home in a kind of more, they're actually feeling control of all the tech and other things that are in it as well. So we're quite excited about trying out that and training our own crew of neighbourhood people to be involved, which is very cool. we've been, as I go through these are like teasers. We've got a session tomorrow, but if these things prick your interest, then we're can deep dive a bit more into any of these elements. So using natural materials, the spatial retrofit stuff, the trade school stuff, or this is around participative decision making. And so we've been doing some experiments around we're using quadratic voting to kind of get preferences and priorities of what people want to do in their neighbourhoods. So we've been very transparent about what resources we've got and what the options are, and then kind of exploring together about what people kind of shared priorities are. And quadratic voting is quite interesting kind of thing, because it's not just a winner-takes-all kind of approach and just majority voting. It is about gathering intensity of preferences. So it begins to get a model where, you get a bit more of a kind of a balanced idea and mobilising collective action around all the possibilities, really. So these are some of the questions that we've been pondering and kind of exploring together. And some really interesting results coming out of this, which I find really hopeful, actually. So, like one of the questions around what kind of energy system do you want? Do you everyone have their own heat pump and their own solar, their own battery, or would you like shared kind of thing? And like, really, everyone wants to do this in a shared way because one, the technology and everything is quite complicated, quite scary to do it on your own. So that sense that you could do it together. And also learning that it maybe works more efficiently and it's better and lower carbon if you actually get shared infrastructure rather than everyone going alone, which I think is really interesting. And I think the other kind of thing is like a real sense of kind of equity and how do we share out these resources that, we maybe can't afford for every single home to be deep retrofitted. So how do we do something that's meaningful for most people? So asking a question about how should we share out the resources? Should we like put it all on just a couple of really deep demonstrators, or share it out among kind of everything really evenly? And the kind of sense was like, we want to have something that we can really show the world about what's possible, like pushing it to the max, but also have some shared stuff there so that everyone feels like they're part of it and benefiting from it as well. So really kind of hopeful kind of conversations about what's possible and how we move forward collectively rather than just, one person on their own isolated. So we kind of developed overall quite a nice recipe of what retrofit we can demonstrate as part of this street demonstrator. We've got 6 homes who are up for being part of the kind of physical works over the next year. And I think what is interesting and kind of one of the choices there was to focus on the fabric retrofit and the ventilation and the green infrastructure retrofit and save out for the energy side of things because people wanted to explore it in shared energy systems rather than just going straight to having individualized ones. So the next phase of the project is going to be about exploring those shared energy options. And I think that overall, like throughout the kind of like the running theme underneath this whole street demonstrator so far is this idea of retrofit as collective acts of care and repair. So it's not a top-down technical fix that's done by somebody else. And it's not something that you're just left on your own to try and work out what bewildering kind of technologies and interventions you should do. But it is about all of the human and the soft things and the other things in the sense of doing it together. And I think this is like a really powerful idea that help kind of mobilize retrofit a way that kind of brings everyone with. So that's what we've been developing in the ground on the ground up. It's not quite so easy sometimes to operationalize that. What I think is interesting is this is a bench, as you can all see. And its story is this in Bologna, probably about 15 years ago, might be a little bit longer than that. There was a group of elders, women in Bologna, who really liked being in the park, but there were no benches to sit down in the park, so they decided to get together and put a bench into the park. Seems a pretty safe thing to do, doesn't it? The city authorities went mental and like slammed down super hard on them, ripped out the benches that they put on, and it was like really harsh. And you think like, okay, luckily the story doesn't end there. kind of like after a lot of kind of dialogue, the Bologna kind of responded in a different way and has actually set up a whole kind of charter of the commons to facilitate and ease the contribution of individual citizens to the common good of the city. And they've actually even put it in the constitution to enable this. And I do think this is like beautiful words. So this is the Article 118 brackets 4 of the Italian constitution, and how then Bologna has interpreted that for their city. That is the constitutional right of citizens to represent a powerful and reliable ally to public administrations in putting new stimulus, energy, talents, resources, capabilities, skills and ideas to improve the life of the city. That's really nice. That and the energy, and to have that kind of, constitutionally recognised is absolutely powerful. And I think when we talk about collective acts of care and repair and what retrofit needs to be, it is exactly that. And that's the energy that we're trying to get. I have to say, I think where we are in Bristol at the moment is not feeling very Bologna. We just got a bill for £22,000 of legal fees to attempt to retrofit 3 council tenants' homes, which is like pretty bizarrely sad to have that as the response from the state when the community has galvanised resources, energy, and this kind of sense of possibility. So we're working to try and find the Bologna energy back into Bristol, and that's the hope of how we can actually begin to deploy resources, because this doesn't feel like this is a feasible kind of way to kind of continue. So it's not the end of the story, so we're not defeated yet. And I think it's like some of the conversation in the morning is like, when you get hit by some of this stuff, there is that sense that you feel like you have to kind of retreat, but it's not. It's how you come back and how you can combine and be kind of stronger collaboratively. And I'm just kind of thinking like, the power of less Tarek in our factory, building a bench and kind of trying to embrace and find some of that kind of power would be a very good thing. So yeah, watch this space for how that unfolds, and that's quite interesting. But I wanted to invite Jazz up just to kind of give a bit of your reflections about being involved in Retrofit Street. So Jazz, yeah, wherever. I think I go, you might need this. But just to give your reflection, Jazz lives on Andover Road, and she can tell you, she's become the radiator lady of Knowle West as well. What are the other? Yeah.
Thank you. Hello. Hi. So I am here to just, I suppose, share my reflections on kind of the journey so far. And I think this sounds loud. So I think to start off, it was just really amazing, I think, just how the community kind of come together, where our community, because of the deprivation and the trauma and the generations of that, we've been, conditioned so that we don't believe in anything different, and we live, especially when you live in a council house, is very much, this is, you put up with what you have. I was saying earlier about when the workmen come in and you say, can you just take off your shoes? Because I've had a new carpet laid, and they're like, no. It's very much like you haven't got any say. But when we started this process, it was like, we do have a say, and we do have choice, and there's so much that we get to do that it's not just, I think what really stood out to me was it wasn't just about the homes. When you're given this opportunity to have choice, it was like, we've got choice over everything. And then when that feeling started, it was like, all right, we got energy. We were doing like the kind of playing out, like Melissa said, and that really got the residents to kind of come together. And I think what was really powerful about that was that, we got to be kind of really in the moment. So we were able to be like, You know, I think because everything's quite quick, we're always rushing around, we've all got loads of jobs to do. Now it feels like, oh, I'm gonna sit and speak to my neighbour, and we're just gonna, yeah, like we're there for supporting each other. So yeah, I mean, it's been amazing. We've had so many kind of conversations about the different materials, things that we would have never spoken about or learned about in any other setting. So we felt really lucky, I think. And then, yeah, now. So since we've kind of had some real kind of pushback from the council, I think, yeah, we've had to be, you know, try to keep that positive mindset. And I think that where you're normally in a really negative mindset, to be given some like opportunity, it was just really like, oh my God, you know, we're not used to this. And then so now it's like we find ourselves in a place where, okay, so we're going to go back to that old mindset of, and letting people kind of, well, the council dictate what kind of happens. But we've been speaking about it, and I've just said, like, actually what's really important in this is thinking about how we work together, like, structures, you know, for people, that's where they're comfortable. And it doesn't mean to say that anybody's right or wrong. I think, you know, we like to think we're right. I think we are right. But people are stuck in systems and structures, and so it's not so much about they're wrong, it's so much more around how we collaborate, how we work together, and yeah, and still, you know, what is it? Is it in 2030 Bristol are supposed to be fully like working towards climate action? And I just think this is prime time to really kind of get those pilots and everything off. So yeah, so I'm hopeful that we will be able to step forward and yeah, then share this. And so it doesn't feel like, you know, it's only going to be able to happen in privately owned homes. It can happen in council homes, and it can happen to all of us, and we can be very much part of it. Is that right?